right, if we could take our seats. Appreciate this. We'll gavel in and I'll go ahead and start my opening. I appreciate everyone joining us for today's hearing, which will focus on a very timely issue of how India's trade policies are affecting U.S. companies and the broader impact these policies may have on the American economy. For a long time, India has been considered a close trading partner and friend of the United States. Since the 1990s, U.S. trade in goods with India has flourished into a relationship with nearly $600 billion a year. In the last decade alone, the U.S. has become India's second largest export market. And this relationship is not completely one-sided. In 2012, the U.S. exported about $20 billion in goods to India, making it our 18th largest export market. A large percentage of these exports being defense-related, which is critical to maintaining strong ties with one of our closest military allies in the region. Unfortunately, after all this progress, we are starting to see some significant and worrisome policies, particularly those related to intellectual property, being adopted by the Indian government over the last 2 years. These developments could pose a threat to the budding trade relationship. Guided by their national manufacturing policy, India has begun engaging in a growing pattern of unfair and discriminatory trade practices which are directly harming U.S. companies in a wide variety of sectors, especially pharmaceuticals, energy technologies, and information and communication technologies. A clear example is the case of Bayer drug Nexivar. In March 2012, India issued what is called a compulsory license for this product, which meant that the Indian government was going to allow an Indian company to receive technology owned and developed by others without any of the cost of research and development, which averages about $1 billion for a new drug to come to market. Bayer is not alone in its struggles with the India government. Pfizer has had a patent for its breakthrough cancer drug, Sutent, revoked twice, and it's currently going through another legal process. And in April 2013, Novartis, a company I'm proud to say has a large manufacturing facility just outside of my district, has a patent for Glyvosate, and that's been denied. Unfortunately, practices like these described above have clear consequences: less money spent on research, less money spent on development, and less innovation and breakthrough cures reaching dying patients all over the world, including India. The pharmaceutical industry is not alone when it comes to American innovators being significantly harmed by India's policies. The U.S. solar panel industry has been exporting hundreds of millions of dollars worth of U.S.-made solar panels and solar cells. However, since 2010, India, as a part of its national solar mission, began requiring that these products be sourced locally, which is contrary to the established rules under the Origin of General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade and WTO rules. The Indian government also has announced regulations pertaining to preferential market access for electronic goods. This mandate would set locally manufactured content requirements for procurement of several electronic goods for public and private sector entities. Concerns of GATT violations have been raised by these mandates as well. I'm hopeful that the Secretary of State, Kerry, can revisit these issues with Vice President Biden's visit coming up shortly thereafter. I'm further hopeful that the administration will continue to raise this issue with the Indian government at the highest levels. Now, this committee is deeply concerned about the long-term effects these actions may have on U.S. companies, our manufacturers, and our workers. It's my hope that throughout our involvement in TTIP and TPP, our representatives will work to ensure that no signatory to these treaties tolerate these type of offenses. And I will yield back my time and recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. India, the world's largest democracy, is an important ally and trading partner for the United States. It is also a market full of potential for U.S. companies, boasting the second largest population, a strong workforce, and a rising middle class. U.S. companies are well positioned to take advantage of these opportunities if there are fair trade rules in place in India and the United States. Unfortunately, there are areas where it appears India is pursuing policies that may be inconsistent with its international trade obligations. These practices are damaging both American and Indian competitiveness in the world economy. For example, India has given preferences to its local solar suppliers. These actions appear to violate international trade agreements, and the United States is challenging them at the World Trade Organization. India also has threatened to institute local preferences for hardware and software development, which would be of great concern. Likewise, India's treatment of the entertainment industry deserves close scrutiny. Bollywood and Hollywood are successfully collaborating on a range of projects, but India's investor restrictions, lax enforcement against piracy, and the absence of strong anti-camcording laws undermine this partnership. The issue is more complex, however, in the area of pharmaceutical patents, which is an issue that has received special attention. The 2005 WTO Agreement on Intellectual Property, known as TRIPS, gives countries clear flexibility with respect to access to medicines. The Doha Declaration, adopted in 2001, allows developing countries to adopt health safeguards like compulsory licensing when necessary to protect the public health. Without question, India is still a developing country, with a third of its population living in extreme poverty. About 2.4 million people are living with HIV/AIDS. Nearly 2 million each year develop tuberculosis. Over 40 million have diabetes, and cancer cases are rising. For many, the price of medicine is the difference between life and death. We need to be able to differentiate between pharmaceutical measures in India that genuinely advance public health and those that are unfair to patent holders. When India seeks to prevent patent abuses like evergreening that artificially delay generic competition, it may be acting within the authority granted by the Doha Declaration. India also plays a critical role by producing 1/5 of the world's generic medicines, half of which are exported. In the battle against HIV/AIDS, Indian generics have brought the cost of HIV treatment in the developing world from $10,000 to $335 per patient per year. Brand name drug companies may not like it, but the reality is that India's robust generics market supplies affordable, essential drugs both to its citizens and to developing nations around the world. If India is pressured to make its patent laws more stringent than its obligations under international trade law require, this crucial supply of medicines could be threatened. In fact, the United States itself has benefited from these low-cost generics. Our nation purchases Indian generics through the PEPFAR program for AIDS relief and the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. To date, generic procurement for PEPFAR alone has saved the U.S. government $934 million while bringing life-saving treatment directly to more than 5 million people. That is why we need to recognize that we'll be addressing complex and important issues today. There are nuances, not one approach to all, and I look forward to this hearing and to the testimony. I want to apologize to the witnesses. There's another hearing that's going on at the same time, and I'll be back and forth, but I will have a chance to review your testimony and hopefully get back here to ask you some really tough questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. And at this time, recognize the Vice Chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Lance, for 5 minutes. And then if you would yield to Marcia when you're finished.
Certainly, be happy to do so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to our distinguished panel. I welcome everyone to this important hearing on our important trade relationship with India. Throughout the last 2 decades, the United States has developed a prosperous trade relationship with India that has been advantageous to both countries. Bilateral trade in goods with India has increased from fewer than $6 million in 1992 to more than $62 billion in 2012. Already throughout the first 4 months of this year, we are trading more with India than we did in the first 4 months of 2012. We have become India's second largest export market, and India has become our 18th largest export market. Additionally, New Jersey's 7th Congressional District, which I have the honor of representing, has many pharmaceutical communications and information technology companies that benefit from trade with India. It is an emerging trade relationship that I hope can further flourish in the future. However, in the past few years, concerns have been raised about the future of the trade relationship. These concerns center on India's recent enacting of trade barriers that discriminate against our nation's exporters and are inconsistent with India's international agreements, as well as its lack of action on intellectual property right protection and enforcement. In the health and telecommunications fields, these trade barriers adversely affect companies in the district I serve, in the state I serve, and in my judgment, the United States. Particularly troubling is India's actions as it relates to the United States' intellectual property laws. Last year, the Indian Patent Office revoked the patent for Sutent, an anti-malaria drug manufactured by Pfizer. The Indian government also issued a compulsory license on a stage 3 liver and kidney cancer drug. I am concerned that the Indian government's interest in its growing pharmaceutical market is clouding the decision-making process as it relates to intellectual property, harming United States companies. The United States must exhibit leadership in the area of protecting IP rights. Emerging companies that adopt the Indian model of intellectual property policy making also pose a risk to United States companies. We must make it clear to all trading partners that these policies set a bad precedent and undermine our mutually beneficial trade agreements. I look forward to examining ways that the United States and India can continue to grow strong trade and investment relationships while leveling the playing field for U.S. exporters operating in India and protecting the intellectual property rights of our companies here at home. And I'm pleased to yield to the Vice Chair of the full committee, Congresswoman Blackburn.
Thank you, and I want to welcome all of you. This is an important hearing. When I was running the Tennessee Film Entertainment and Music Commission back in the mid-90s, I spent a lot of time working on property rights and protecting U.S. innovators, and because of that, I really share the frustration with our job creators and our innovators at what is happening with foreign governments who are constantly trying to undermine our intellectual property and use it for their benefit and gain. When you look at India's industrial policy, trade barriers, the rampant piracy, the tax discrimination, and what appears to be an absolute disregard for our intellectual property rights, you realize that India is a country that is not willing to play by the rules right now. What's worse is that they're trying to gloss over this. And here's an example. Last week, the Indian ambassador sent a letter to my office defending their abusive practices that are killing jobs of millions of hard-working Americans. India's principles set a disappointing example to the rest of the world. No country that calls itself a friend of the U.S. would celebrate isolationism the way that India is doing. It is a shame that India's government has gone as far as they have to threaten our bilateral relationship, U.S. trade, and foreign investment. Tennessee's IT, bio, pharmaceutical, chemical, ag, medical equipment, and other manufacturing sectors are all subject to India's punishing rules, taxes, and regulations. It is no wonder we have overwhelming bipartisan agreement in Congress that India's government must reverse course or risk seriously threatening our bilateral relationship. I've gone over my time. I yield back.
Thank you. At this time, I'm going to introduce our witnesses here today and thank all of you for being here. We'll begin with Linda Maggette Dempsey, who is with the National Association of Manufacturers, then to Mark Elliott, Executive Vice President, Global Intellectual Property Center, U.S. Chamber, then Roy Walden, who is Chief Intellectual Property Officer with Pfizer, and then Jim Simmernow, who is Vice President in the Trade Competitiveness in the Solar Energy Industry Association, Robert Hoffman. Mr. Hoffman is the Senior President of Government Relations for Information Technology Industry Council. Then Rohit Malpani, who came here from Geneva, and no, not Geneva, Nebraska. And he is Director of Policy and Advocacy for, why don't you say it?
Doctors Without Borders, or Médecins Sans Frontières.
All right. Well, Doctors Without Borders, if that was on there, would have been easy for me to pronounce. That's our panel, and we will start then with Linda. You are first.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Terry, members of the subcommittee. I welcome the opportunity to be here today to testify on behalf of the National Association of Manufacturers, the NAM, the nation's largest industrial trade association with 12,000 small, medium, and large manufacturers in every sector throughout all 50 states. A tangle of trade barriers is an apt description of the significant and growing challenges that manufacturers in the United States are facing in India. The U.S.-India commercial relationship is a long-standing one. Our countries were co-founders of the World Trading System with the creation of the GATT in 1948, which later became the World Trade Organization, that has helped the global economy expand. Manufacturers in the United States have long sought closer economic ties with India, particularly as India began opening its economy. Over the last decade, that relationship has grown. The United States is India's second largest export market, and we share a $60 billion relationship in manufacturing trade. Manufacturers in the United States have faced challenges in the Indian market, from very high tariffs and weak intellectual property protection and enforcement to complex and expensive regulatory processes. But over the last year and a half, we have seen a much broader and more damaging industrial policy being implemented in India that seeks to grow its economy at the expense of ours, to advantage Indian manufacturers while undermining manufacturers here in the United States. For example, consistent with its national manufacturing policy issued in 2011, India has undertaken a number of actions across a range of sectors. India's preferential market access rules would impose local content requirements on the purchase of information and communications technology that could easily capture half of India's market. In the clean energy sector, India is mandating local content and considering expanding that rule to technologies that comprise the bulk of U.S. solar exports to India. India bans imports of remanufactured medical imaging devices and other equipment, while allowing sales of such equipment as long as it is remanufactured in India. India has recently denied or revoked patents for nearly a dozen innovative medicines. This includes medicines that were either distributed in India free of charge or sold at a fraction of their cost. India imposes price caps on hundreds of medications, but only on foreign products, not those that Indian researchers develop. Indian tax authorities are increasingly imposing discriminatory taxes on U.S. business. We have other critical concerns, including barriers to foreign direct investment, particularly in telecommunications, as well as requirements to use local information infrastructure that inhibit cross-border data flows. My business colleagues will go into more detail on many of these concerns. But what is clear to the NAM and our manufacturers throughout the United States is that these policies really have no other purpose than to favor India's domestic corporations, many in strategic state-favored and state-advantaged sectors, at the expense of manufacturing and jobs here in the United States. These actions are no way for a responsible stakeholder and rising global power to treat its second-largest trading partner. They are counterproductive to India's own goals of attracting foreign investment and developing its own innovative economy. These actions are inconsistent with international norms, and some of them are inconsistent with India's obligations under the GATT, now WTO, that India helped create more than 65 years ago. Without an immediate and purposeful response, India's industrial policy could spread and be applied to other products and sectors, and it sets an unfortunate example for other countries that are sure to follow. And it makes it difficult to see how India and the United States can move effectively forward on new initiatives and a stronger relationship, such as a bilateral investment treaty that really could have a chance to help forge a stronger commercial relationship. To demonstrate our resolve and press for real results, the NIM, GIPC, Solar Energy Group joined with 13 other trade associations last week to form the Alliance for Fair Trade with India, AFTI. Together, we are asking the Obama administration to address this issue at the highest levels and to end discrimination against American exports. We seek a level playing field and a fair shake in India. We want India to end its discriminatory industrial policy and unfair trade practices and ensure those practices are not repeated. We understand Secretary of State Kerry raised these issues during this week's U.S.-India Strategic Dialogue, and we hope and expect the Indian government will respond positively and work constructively with the manufacturing community to address and resolve these issues quickly. A strong bilateral trade and economic relationship is essential to achieving our strategic aims with India. To have that kind of partnership we all want, India must play by the rules. Thank you.
Well done, and now recognize Mr. Elliott, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Terry, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Commerce, Manufacturing and Trade. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce appreciates your leadership and the opportunity to testify today on how India's industrial policies are hurting U.S. companies. Today I'm going to focus my testimony on an array of IP concerns that the U.S. business community has in India. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, U.S. IP industries account for $5 trillion of the nation's GDP, 60% of exports, and employ 40 million Americans. In short, intellectual property drives knowledge economies. In 2010, the then President of India declared the next 10 years to be India's decade of innovation. Unfortunately, recent events in India suggest otherwise. Particular policy, regulatory, and legal decisions have deteriorated IP rights in India, making India an outlier in the international community. Last December, the Chamber released an international IP index comparing intellectual property environments across 11 key markets. This was the first comprehensive national IP index, and it ranked India consistently last behind Brazil, China, and Russia in nearly every indicator. This trend is bad for India, it's bad for investment, and it's bad for international trade. I'd like to provide the committee with a few specific examples of industry's concerns. With respect to the much-needed copyright legislation that passed India's parliament last year, the end result failed to achieve the objective of the legislation, which was to implement the WIPO copyright treaty. The recording and music industry estimate lost revenue to piracy of $431 million in India. India's reported rate of PC software piracy in 2011 was 63%, an estimated commercial value of $2.9 billion. India finds itself an outlier with respect to taxation when it comes to development centres within India. It currently assesses tax by allocating a share of the company's worldwide operating profits, despite the fact that the centres within India bear no financial risk and they don't own the resulting IP. This methodology is inconsistent with international practice and is not accepted by US tax authorities, resulting in controversy and double taxation. India has also shown disregard for intellectual property rights of the biopharmaceutical industry as stated. There have been at least 5 globally recognized patents that have been revoked, denied, or compulsory licensed within the last 12 months. While some of these decisions While some may claim that these are unrelated policy, regulatory and legal decisions, the fact remains that these attacks on the pharmaceutical patents are only happening in India. And this is not just about access to medicines, as some may have you believe. For example, in the case of Gleevec, Novartis provided the drug free of charge to 95% of the 16,000 patients suffering from leukemia. The remaining 5% were heavily subsidized. It is also worth noting that the Indian generic now charges $2,100 annually for a generic version of the drug that Novartis was providing for free. There are currently more than 5,000 innovative drugs in development around the world at the moment, and the industry has invested $5 billion in R&D since 2000. The medical innovation system is clearly working, and India's recent behaviour undermines the global IP environment that protects and encourages this innovation. For IP-intensive industries, the protection of IP rights is one of the most important factors companies consider when investing in a particular market. We have heard from a dozen industry and trade associations that the erosion of intellectual property rights in India will impact their members' decisions to invest there. There are, however, leaders in India who recognise the importance of investment in innovation. On May 11, the current President of India noted that India's innovation bottom line is not very encouraging, as a number of patent applications filed annually in leading countries like the US and China are roughly 12 times more than that of India. He called upon the private sector to increase their share of spending on research and development to the levels prevalent in other key markets such as the United States, Japan, and South Korea. One very obvious way to increase this investment and innovation would be for the Indian government to raise IP standards to the same levels that encourage business to invest in the United States, Japan, and South Korea. We thank the subcommittee for holding this hearing, and we look forward to working with you to address business concerns in India.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Now, Mr. Walden, you were recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Terry, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify at today's hearing. My name is Roy Walden. I'm Pfizer's Chief Intellectual Property Counsel. In that capacity, I am responsible for overseeing and protecting Pfizer's IP portfolio worldwide. Pfizer was founded in 1849 in New York and are headquartered in New York today. Pfizer employs more than 90,000 individuals globally, including over 30,000 people in the United States. I would first like to express Pfizer's appreciation for work by this committee to promote jobs, innovation, and enhance patient safety through the recent reauthorization of PDUFA. Through major research efforts, Pfizer is developing the medical solutions that will matter most to the people we serve. Specialized efforts in biosimilars as well as orphan and genetic diseases also illustrate our dedication to develop and deliver innovative medicines and vaccines that will benefit patients around the world. Pfizer's R&D pipeline includes several potential breakthrough medicines in Phase 3 clinical trials. These include treatments for breast cancer, cardiovascular disease, psoriasis, and meningitis. Unfortunately, recent events in India threaten our IP and undermine our ability to innovate, create jobs, and provide faster access to life-saving medicines. My testimony today will highlight Pfizer's serious concerns about these events, their impact on the U.S. and the industry, and their potential spillover effect into other markets. IP-intensive industries directly and indirectly support 40 million U.S. jobs, drive over 60% of exports, and pay on average 40% higher than other industries that do not rely on IP. Pharma member companies invest over $54 billion annually in R&D. The path to a successful breakthrough cure is an arduous one. On average, it takes more than $1 billion and around 10 to 15 years of research to develop a new medicine. Our R&D ultimately becomes the IP that allows us to create new medicines. Effective IP laws and predictable, transparent enforcement of these laws are essential. For the biopharmaceutical industry, IP protection enables us to continue to invest in new research and development for medicines. Pfizer's future growth and the jobs that come with that growth will depend on our ability to engage on a level playing field in all global markets. India is one such market. Pfizer has been operating in India for over 60 years. We have R&D and manufacturing facilities in Mumbai, Thane, and Goa. We are a leading company in India in terms of innovation and employee satisfaction. Despite our commitment to India, over the past year we have seen a rapid deterioration of the innovative environment in the country. India has undermined patent rights for at least 9 innovative medicines, including one of ours. A recent history of compulsory licensing, discriminatory interpretation of the patent law, and refusal to enforce patents strongly indicate that India is an outlier in recognizing IP rights. These 9 innovative medicines have received patent protection in countries throughout the world. This recent history not only creates significant uncertainty in the market, but also undermines our ability to invest and compete fairly in India. Pfizer's recent experience in India demonstrates a flagrant disregard of patent rights. In the last year, Pfizer has struggled to defend its patent for the compound sunitinib, the active ingredient in Sutent, against efforts to revoke it. The patent has now been revoked twice under questionable legal theories and is currently back in force pending new proceedings before the Indian Patent Office, which is an administrative body under the Ministry of Commerce and Trade. Each of the earlier revocations was reversed when Pfizer showed that its rights to a fair hearing and due process had been denied. During the back and forth of the revocation proceedings, one generic manufacturer launched its product in the Indian market, and as a result, the market is now flooded with 2 years' worth of supply from this manufacturer. In order for there to be effective patent protection, the system of IP enforcement ought to include mechanisms to recall infringing goods from that market. I'd also like to note that to ensure Sutent is available to patients who need it, Pfizer developed a patient access program in India which provides 80% of the patients taking Sutent with a complete or partial subsidy. Pfizer exists to invent and manufacture high-quality medicines to improve the health and well-being of patients around the world. To achieve this goal, effective, predictable, and enforceable IP protections are essential. India's actions to undermine the incentives needed to make investment to develop new medicines, a hostile environment to IP will have a devastating impact on R&D investment in both the U.S. and India and cause significant harm to U.S. jobs and economic growth. India's protectionist and discriminatory policies which exploit U.S. IP to benefit their own industry requires an equally bold response. It is important that we view these actions for what they are, industrialist policies to benefit the competitiveness of India's own domestic industry. We appreciate the focus you have provided on this issue today and look forward to working with members of this committee and other stakeholders to identify and implement solutions that will benefit innovators and patients in the U.S., India, and worldwide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Waldron. And now, Mr. Hoffman, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the members of the subcommittee, Vice Chairman Lance. We appreciate the opportunity to appear today. I'm Robert Hoffman, Senior Vice President for the Information Technology Industry Council, ITI. ITI represents 52 of the most dynamic, innovative companies in hardware, software, and services. We obviously, given the strong presence of IT in India, consider the bilateral relationship between the U.S. and India to be an extremely important one for our industry. For the overall economy in the United States, there's no question that the bilateral economic ties have been relatively recent in development. It certainly can be said that a big reason why that is the case is because for at least the first 44 years of the Republic of India's existence, Cold War politics and a socialist, largely closed economy really made the development of commercial ties very difficult. All of that changed in the 1990s when, in response to economic and monetary crises, the government of India took steps to gradually open its economy. It also coincided, by coincidence, with the information technology boom of the 1990s and the development of the information and communications technology industry in India. There's no question that the combination of market opening reforms and letting the IT industry in India operate in an open fashion, utilizing market incentives and taking advantage of investments in education and an entrepreneurial and innovative team of people in the IT industry, it's had some extraordinary significant effects in India. It's literally helped move hundreds of millions of people off of extreme poverty. It's also helped to triple the annual GDP growth rate in India, all within 2 decades. If liberalization is allowed to continue and market-based incentives are allowed to move forward and innovators and entrepreneurs in India are allowed to flourish, some have estimated that India's middle class can number well over 500 million people. Put that in perspective when the U.S. population is 300 million people. This is all very exciting, and from our perspective, as India considers options to develop a manufacturing base, our recommendations are pretty simple. You've seen market-based innovation work in the IT sector. You've seen what your innovators and entrepreneurs can do in India. Turn them loose. That we are Exhibit A, that it can work. Unfortunately, and this leads to my second point, and as many of my colleagues here on the panel have already demonstrated, India appears to be moving in the opposite direction and is preparing to throw its economy in reverse and undermining the gains that we have seen in the last 2 decades. Let me provide a couple of examples. Frankly, I've been to India several times, and I have to tell you that one of the frustrating aspects of visiting with government officials is that the economic success stories of the last 2 decades haven't been fully grasped within the bureaucracy in India. We see it in the random and oftentimes troubling enforcement measures taken by tax and customs officials. Another example is the fact that India is sitting right now on the sidelines while we're negotiating an expansion of the Information Technology Agreement. The ITA, which was agreed to in the mid-1990s, was extremely helpful to India as it pursued its objectives in IT. An expanded ITA would actually help their efforts to advance their manufacturing initiatives. So we're very surprised to see them on the sidelines. Last but not least, we're very troubled by their recent efforts to impose what amounts to a forced manufacturing policy on electronics products in India. The fact of the matter is, right now, if you want to sell to the government of India, you've got to manufacture electronics products within the Republic of India. And there are some serious concerns that this policy is going to be expanded to the private sector. And all you had to do is look at the Economic Times of India front page story today that talks about how it plans to expand this policy with telecom operators. And if it's allowed to continue, they'll expand this forced manufacturing requirement, all the way into other sectors, including financial services and energy. So we're obviously very concerned. We're trying to encourage the government of India, working with people like or organizations like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and NAM and other institutions worldwide, to get India on the right track toward more economic liberalization, utilizing market-based incentives. We have to be very careful that if they go down the road of forced manufacturing, it could have a contagion effect and encourage other countries to do the same thing. The fact is, if you look at countries like China and Brazil, forced localization is a pretty addictive drug. And frankly, what we really need here is a little policy intervention. We consider India a valued friend, collaborator, and competitor, but the fact of the matter is, friends don't let friends get addicted to forced localization. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we appreciate again the opportunity to appear.
Doesn't necessarily fit on a bumper sticker, but...
No. Give me a couple of days, though.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Smirnow, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. The Solar Energy Industries Association, or SEIA, represents over 1,000 solar businesses operating within the United States, including leading U.S. solar manufacturers and exporters. Today, solar employs over 120,000 Americans at more than 5,600 companies, most of which are small businesses. Solar is also one of the fastest growing industries in America. My testimony today will focus on India's growing use of an industrial policy which discriminates against U.S. solar exports, thereby providing an unfair competitive advantage to India's domestic solar manufacturers. With some of the best solar resources in the world and the cost of solar continuing to decline, India's solar sector is poised for explosive growth, providing an important export opportunity for U.S. solar manufacturers. Indeed, over the past few years, as the Chairman indicated in his opening statement, U.S. solar panel manufacturers have contracted to supply hundreds of millions of dollars of solar exports to India. Importantly, most of these exports are comprised of U.S. solar panels based on thin film technology. A company called First Solar, headquartered in Arizona with manufacturing operations in Ohio, is the leading global producer and innovator of this technology. And this is indeed a leading cutting-edge U.S. technology. At the same time, however, India's solar policies have increasingly turned inward. In 2010, India adopted a local content requirement as part of the country's national solar mission. While we fully support India's desire to promote solar manufacturing, both as an economic development tool and a solution to climate change, India's government support measures must be consistent with India's international trade obligations. India's solar local content requirement, however, is a direct violation of these obligations. One of the arguments we hear in support of the local content measure is that it is necessary to nurture the growth of a young industry, particularly in an environment of intense global competition. But while local content requirements may provide some protection for domestic manufacturers, they also stifle innovation, limit a country's access to next-generation technologies, and increase costs, not to mention the fact that local content requirements are explicitly prohibited by global trading rules. Returning to the specifics of India's solar industrial policy, the national solar mission is divided into 3 phases. Under the first tranche of Phase 1, India required that eligible projects based on crystalline silicon technology, that's the other half of the solar panel industry, versus thin film. And that's where the U.S. has a technological advantage. In this first phase, India required that one half meet a local content requirement for cells. And solar cells are the heart of a solar panel for this technology. So whilst U.S. companies could sell cells into India, or they could sell modules, but they weren't able to sell cells. U.S. origin panels were thus barred from competing. For the second tranche of Phase 1, India broadened this local content requirement to mandate that national solar mission products use only crystalline silicon cells and panels manufactured in India, a significant lost opportunity for U.S. exports. Looking forward, we are concerned that India will expand its local content requirement yet again to cover thin film technology, effectively targeting hundreds of millions of dollars of U.S. exports. Our only hope is that the U.S. government's recent decision to initiate a WTO case against India will eventually cause India to reverse course. The U.S.-India dispute follows on the heels of a recent WTO finding that Ontario, Canada's local content requirement for solar goods, substantially similar to India's, violated Canada's WTO obligations. In response, Canada has indicated that the solar program will be brought into compliance with the WTO decision, which we presume means that Canada will remove the local content provision. India should follow Canada's lead today and remove the local content provision from its national solar mission. It's important context. The U.S. government first tried to establish a collaborative dialogue with India regarding the local content requirement, but was rebuffed. The U.S. case was therefore a last-ditch effort to get India to the table. I want to make clear that we support the overall objectives of India's national solar mission and its focus on growing a solar manufacturing base. We just don't support the discriminatory aspects of it. That concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now the gentleman, Mr. Malpani, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. My name is Rohit Malpani, and I'm the Director of Policy and Analysis at Doctors Without Borders.
Is your mic on?
Yes.
All right.
It is. Doctors Without Borders, or Médecins Sans Frontières. MSF is an international medical humanitarian organization which provides impartial medical assistance to those affected by armed conflict, epidemics, exclusions from health care, or natural disasters. Today, MSF carries out this work in more than 70 countries worldwide, while raising awareness on neglected crises and advocating for improved medical tools and protocols. As a medical treatment provider, MSF is able to speak about the relationship between intellectual property rules and access to medicines, and about the role India has played in enabling millions access to life-saving medicines. In 2001, MSF faced what seemed like insurmountable barriers in meeting critical health needs and saving the lives of our patients. In particular, we faced an astronomical $10,000 per person per year price tag for life-saving HIV medicines, which barred treatment for millions and prevented us from being able to reach more than a very limited number of patients. But a solution was found in India. The country, free from having to grant patents on medicines until 2005, was able to manufacture low-cost quality generic medicines for a fraction of the existing price. Literally overnight, the cost to treat someone with HIV fell by over 96% to $360 per patient per year. Generic competition has seen the cost fall even further. As a result, more than 9 million people worldwide now receive treatment for HIV, many of those from PEPFAR-funded programs. India's role in this treatment scale-up has been and continues to be a critical one. As the pharmacy to the developing world and the biggest source of quality generic medicines, governments and donors such as the United States rely heavily on Indian generic medicines. 98% of the medicines used in American taxpayer-funded treatment programs rely on low-cost generic medicines manufactured in India. Today, India is a full member of the World Trade Organization, providing patent protection for medicines. Between 2005 and 2008, India granted over 2,000 patents for medicines and continues to grant patents today. These patents delay generic competition, which keeps costs high and places an enormous burden on treatment providers, such as MSF, ministries of health in low-income countries, and donor governments, including the United States. While India does reward genuine innovation with 20-year patents, it manages to strike a balance between providing intellectual property protection and having the flexibility to protect public health. This balance is possible as both the TRIPS agreement and the Doha Declaration on TRIPS and Public Health enshrines the right of WTO members to implement safeguards and flexibilities. One safeguard under TRIPS is the right of governments to define strict patentability criteria. Governments have the right to define scope of patentability in a way that addresses the needs of their own citizens as long as they abide by international agreements. The United States recently contributed to its own definition when the Supreme Court reaffirmed strict patentability criteria for gene patents. India has adopted a standard of pharmaceutical patenting that is stricter than in the United States or the European Union, but which is in line with international trade rules. In rejecting one patent application by Novartis on a salt of an already known substance, the Indian Supreme Court was legally validating a choice by the Indian government that patents should only be granted when those products represent a genuine advance over older versions of medicines. By contrast, the United States has decided to approve secondary patents for very obvious modifications of existing medicines, which often delays generic competition and keeps prices high. This is a practice commonly called evergreening, by which the drug industry extends their monopoly on drugs beyond the original patent's 20 years. Allowing companies to extend patent protection and keep prices high is expensive for U.S. consumers and the U.S. government. A second legally recognized safeguard to overcome barriers of affordable access is the right to issue compulsory licenses. The United States government used compulsory licenses for medicines in the past and stated that it would look to them in the future if necessary. In India, a compulsory license was granted in the interest of public health when the country was faced with a price tag for a cancer drug, which kept it out of reach of 98% of those eligible for treatment. Granting the compulsory license reduced the price by 97%, while recognizing the innovation behind the drug through the payment of a 7% royalty. The U.S. government continues to make adjustments to its patent system to achieve a better balance between rewarding innovation and providing for public health needs. It should allow other governments like India to do the same. The measures taken by the Indian government do not undermine innovation, but rather curtail excesses of the patent system and ensure that companies focus their energies on scientific and not legal innovation. Governments around the world and U.S. assistance programs are straining under high costs for new medicines. In times of economic austerity, we should remember that high medicine prices are an issue of life and death for millions of people. Ensuring that balanced innovation systems make those medicines available to those who need them most is imperative. Thank you again for the opportunity to provide testimony on this important topic.
Thank you, Ms. Mampani. Appreciate your testimony. And for the record, unanimous consent to submit the letter from the Ambassador of India in response to several members objecting to the patent and trademark issues. Hearing none, we'll submit that for the record. And also a letter from Advancing Global Technologies, TIA, to me and Jan Schakowsky, our letter from Grant Seifert. Any objections? None heard, so ordered. And you have another one?
We have two.
All right. Our little business before we have questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have two documents to submit for the record, one from the California Healthcare Institute, and this one I think is submitted to the House Committee on the Tangle of Trade Barriers on how India's industrial policy is hurting U.S. companies.
Without no objection heard, so ordered.
Okay, and the second one is by the public citizen. India's patent system plays by WTO rules and supports global health. I'd like to submit this for the record.
Hearing no objection, so ordered. All right, now the fun question, and no pun intended. Well, actually it is. I'm going to ask a fairly generic question to the panel, but obviously with the practices of India in the last couple years in compulsory licensing practices and seeming court orders to usurp patents or deny a patent. This seems to be an economic development policy issued by the state. Now, how political do you think these protectionist measures are? Is India continuing to head in even a deeper protectionist direction? Or does the government simply flow with the trade winds, so to speak? And if you can keep it within about 45 seconds per answer, I want to go straight down the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From our perspective, what we're seeing in India today is a reversal of course from the liberalization they were inching along in, and it is a broad policy across a bunch of different sectors. Intellectual property is a key piece of it, localization is another piece, but it is a move to shut their economy, to try to grow their economy at the expense of ours in the United States and other foreign countries.
I would agree with Linda's statement. I would only add, I think that there are mixed signals that often come out of the political hierarchy there. The President has made some very positive statements, but clearly the direction of the company is going in another direction. So it's a situation where quite often the rhetoric is very different to what is happening in the real world, and the real world seems to suggest that India is heading in the very wrong direction.
I would say for the pharmaceutical sector that there most definitely is a protectionist bent towards protecting their own industries. In fact, when the patent law was implemented in 2005, there were explicit statements about protecting and designing the law to protect local interests and the ability for those companies to maintain their export markets. So there definitely is a concerted policy, and even looking at the Supreme Court decision on the Gleevec decision, it's clearly within there that the protection of export markets is intended.
To your initial point, Mr. Chairman, you can't escape the political dynamic that's currently going on in India. You have a country that is within 1 year of elections at the national level, and elections that are considered to be very tight. That said, I agree with my fellow panelists that the trend is more in the direction of protectionism, while there is certainly a bit of discussion of sorts that's going on internally with the Indian government. I think what raises the level of concern is that currently heading the government was the architect of the opening of the government of India. Prime Minister Singh, when he ran the finance ministry in 1991, essentially opened the doors not just for the overall economy, but for the IT industry. So when you have someone of that stature who has a free market background, while the various departments and agencies are pursuing protectionist measures, that gives a lot of us here cause for concern.
No microphone.
I think India sees as a lot of countries do, sees the long-term opportunity of solar energy, particularly as a job creator. And so that really is their focus. The current global environment for solar, we have massive overcapacity. And so it's difficult for young companies and a young industry, which is India's trying to grow, to compete in that environment of intense global competition. So that really, I think, is the motivator for them to utilize the local content requirement to protect this young industry. But it's the wrong mechanism, and there are a variety of other solutions they could turn to that would be WTO consistent.
All right, Mr. Malpani.
We know that the TRIPS agreement, under which these rules are formulated, specifically create exceptions for public health and public interest. And we think that's the reason why India is using their rights and flexibilities. We heard a statistic that there's a 500 million person market in India today for various technologies. There's also 500 million people in India without clean water and electricity today, as well as millions of other people markets in the developing world. The other thing to remember is the concept of separation of powers, which is so sacred in the United States. These decisions at the Patent Office and at the Indian Supreme Court are done by the judiciary. not by the executive or legislative branch. And I think India maintains that same separation of powers as the United States has with its patent decisions.
Well, that concludes my time, and recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney, for his 5 minutes of questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a very important hearing. As we know, the United States, we take a lot of pride in our intellectual properties and our innovation. And we want to see that take place in India within a framework that benefits both countries. And we don't seem to be hearing that that's what's going on there. So I appreciate the testimony that we've heard this morning. But I would like to sort of make one point first. Mr. Mopani, I was going to ask you to explain evergreening, but you did a pretty good job in your testimony. I just want to ask, is that one instance of a progressive policy adopted by India, which is putting it ahead of many of the other countries? Is that one example then?
India's policy on evergreening is one actually that's also been adopted by other countries, sometimes in parallel to India and sometimes afterwards. This is a flexibility that's fully recognized under the TRIPS agreement. Actually, the United States itself had a more strict patentability standard in the past, which has been loosened up over the last few decades, and which has led to this profusion of secondary patents that delay generic competition far beyond 20 years. This is, in our opinion, has been done specifically both to protect the public interest, to ensure that the patent term does not exceed 20 years, except for genuine innovation. And it is also, we think, to encourage real innovation instead of simply trying to encourage legal innovation on the behalf of drug companies. There's a study in the United States which shows that secondary patenting and evergreening leads to an additional 6 years of patent protection for medicines in this country, which thereby creates higher costs for consumers and for the healthcare system.
Thank you. Mr. Smirno, I'm a very big proponent of clean energy technology. Well, let me ask, are there Indian trade rules that target the United States specifically?
The local content provision that I'm concerned about does not target the United States specifically. It's any import into India of the technology at issue. Though India has initiated anti-dumping duty case that includes the United States. That case is in the preliminary stage. It targets the United States, China, Taiwan, and Malaysia. So that would be one example where there are some activities that are targeting the United States.
Can we work collaboratively with them to help resolve those barriers, or is that something that they're pretty firm in right now?
Yeah, I hope so. And I think there's an opportunity and a responsibility of industry to build some bridges with India in the renewable space. Over the past couple years, SIA has been working with the leading solar trade associations in Europe and Asia to find ways to collaborate. We haven't yet built those bridges with India, and we need to. And I think I commit today to reach out to the Indian solar industry and start building those bridges. I also think there's an opportunity to inject trade into some of these collaborative efforts that the State Department, Department of Energy are engaged in right now.
Thank you. Mr. Huffman, it's good to see you here in the committee. What specific recommendations would you have for India so that it can build its electronic and telecommunication equipment production capabilities without resorting to these localization practices?
Well, first and foremost, do what works. Rely on the market-based incentives that have created an extraordinary IT industry all over India. That's first. Second, it should have joined the ITA expansion talks. They're at the end stages. They could still potentially join and sign the ITA expansion. That was extraordinarily helpful to provide the IT industry in India with duty-free treatment of products that enabled them to build the infrastructure that they needed to succeed. As a number of my panelists know, manufacturing is very IT enabled these days, so you can use those same building blocks in ITA expansion. And so we're hopeful that perhaps they will ultimately join with the expanded ITA.
Well, it sounds like there's steps that they're aware of that will help them actually improve their economy without resorting to these localization practices.
And I do want to make one concluding point, Congressman. And right now, I mean, you saw, you know, I waved it around, but you saw the article in the Economic Times of India. I can certainly provide it, you know, to the staff to distribute to the members of the subcommittee. But they're on the cusp of taking their forced electronics manufacturing policy into the private sector. And we would strongly urge them to basically, you know, stand pat. We believe to go further forward would be very disruptive to their own economy, to our own, and to other governments and industries around the world. So they literally have their toes on the line. We know that there are discussions going on internally within the government, not just in terms of where to put it through with the private sector. There's also talk about applying it to software. So we hope that they will keep those toes on the line and not proceed forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired, and the chair recognizes the full committee chair, Mr. Upton, for 5 minutes, or as long as he wants.
5 minutes will be for good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate everyone's testimony this morning. I just want to say, when I first learned of this issue just a few short weeks ago from Pfizer, my largest employer in my district, it's been amazing how many other companies that I've, you know, walking to vote, doing a variety of different things that we do. A number of different companies have come up and shared with me their exact same story about trouble with India. And Mr. Walden, I want to also thank you for your kind words in regard to the committee's work on enacting PDUFA last year. Every member of this committee, Republican and Democrat, was a strong supporter, and we were able to carry that ball down the field and get it through the Senate and to the President. Question that I have, Pfizer, you've been there some 60 years now in India, Mr. Walden. What's different now? What's happening that's different now from the landscape prior to the creation of their IP regime? Can you walk us through some of the things that have happened?
In the early days, we were primarily a consumer health company in India. We sold products. Our biggest products were vitamins and cough syrups. With the change in the law, it was expected that there would be the support mechanism of IP to help us introduce innovative medicines into the market there.
And that lured you in more, right? I mean, that lured more investment into India?
And so I mean, to launch a new drug into a market is a costly adventure, and you do have to provide medical education. It's an advance for a market like India to receive almost immediately the benefits of a new innovative medicine from the innovator. So this is of great value and importance to patients in India, and I couldn't stress more that having that support mechanism in place does allow us to do what we do best.
Now, in your testimony, and I was late coming to the hearing for a variety of other important reasons, but you indicated that since early 2012, India's policies and actions have undermined patent rights for at least 9 innovative medicines. Many of these medicines have received patent protection in most countries across the world, suggesting that India is an outlier in recognizing and enforcing patent rights. This is not only creating significant uncertainty in the market, but it also undermines our ability to compete fairly in India and our willingness to invest there. Are you actually considering reductions in investment in India? What is the landscape that you're looking at in the future as it relates to that?
I think it's too early to comment on what decisions may or may not be made going forward. I think it's going to be a matter of whether one can continue to do and introduce those products without a support mechanism to do it. I think we have to see, and time will tell, whether the environment becomes so hostile that you just have to retreat.
Now, the argument on the other side from the Indian government, they've repeatedly stated that they have a complete ecosystem supporting a well-settled, stable, robust intellectual property regime. Specifically, they go on to say that multinational companies like Pfizer have been granted many patents in India. How do you respond to that claim?
Well, the Patent Office has been very active since the adoption of the patent law in 2005 in issuing patents, but it's really important to note that the issuance of a patent is only significant if a right actually attaches to that piece of paper. What we complain of at this point is that, notwithstanding the existence of these documents that are issued from an administrative agency, when you try to enforce them or try to give them meaning, they sort of fail in the breach. A lot of the filings that happen in India, or at least worldwide, are very early stage scientific things, so a lot of the things that you see pending or have been allowed are probably things that are in the phase 1, phase 2 stage and have not yet reached the commercial stage. But I would say enforcement in the breach is really where it really matters when you're talking about IP rights.
Have you had any help from the administration in terms of the trade rep or any of the federal agencies here in terms of complaints that have gone forward?
We have been speaking with USTR and the administration, and we're very hopeful that this issue has been raised during Secretary Kerry's visit to India, and hopefully that this dialogue will continue. This is very important that these issues be raised in bilateral discussions with India so that they understand that we really are serious about this. So I expect going forward that we will at least have this, and I've seen to date that the issue has gotten some traction. So,
well, hopefully this hearing will elevate the cause as well. So I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the chair recognizes the full committee ranking member, Mr. Waxman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In November 2011, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said that if we make smart investments based on sound science and a shared global responsibility, we can save millions of lives and achieve a goal once considered unthinkable: an AIDS-free generation. We have made remarkable progress toward that goal. The United States, through its PEPFAR program, has helped hundreds of thousands of people each year avoid contracting HIV, and now provides direct support for the antiretroviral treatment of more than 5 million people with HIV. That's 3 times the number that were supported as recently as 2008. But there's still a long way to go. In India, the focus of today's hearing, there are more than 2 million people infected with HIV. Worldwide, there are 2.5 million new HIV infections a year. And in this difficult spending environment, even the budget for PEPFAR was recently cut. In these circumstances, if we are to achieve our goals, low-cost medicines must play an essential role. Mr. Malpani, what are the provisions of the TRIPS agreement that permit countries certain flexibilities on intellectual property rights, and what purpose do they serve, and how are these reinforced in the Doha Declaration?
Thank you for the question. Just to reiterate that treatment is prevention for HIV today. It leads basically to a 100% reduction in the transmission of the virus, and for the first time in history, we have a chance of defeating HIV. The TRIPS agreement and the flexibilities included in the TRIPS agreement can play an important role in ensuring affordable generic medicines. As I mentioned in my testimony, the scope of patentability clause in the TRIPS agreement allows countries and governments to define what is patentable or not so that they can prevent evergreening and long terms of monopoly protection. There is also provisions around compulsory licensing, which allow governments to exercise patents to allow the importation or production of generic medicines to bring down costs and to protect public health. There are also other provisions in the TRIPS agreement that allow the early working of drug patents to allow generics to enter the market when a patent expires. This is used in the United States, as well as parallel importation of medicines, which is not in the United States, but which is used across much of the developed and developing world.
The United States was among more than 140 countries to agree to the Doha Declaration, which clarified the circumstances under which countries may issue a compulsory license on a patent. Can you talk specifically about India's compulsory license on the Bayer drug Nexavar, and the Supreme Court decision regarding the patentability standards for the Novartis drug Gleevec? And in your opinion, is India acting within its obligations under the TRIPS agreement?
Yes, we do believe that in both situations, the government has acted within the scope of the TRIPS agreement. With respect to the decision with Novartis, the issue at hand is whether or not the measure that India has used to strike down the patent on imatinib mesylate is under the TRIPS agreement, and we believe it does. It is part of the 3-part test under the TRIPS agreement for defining what is inventive. It is not an additional provision under the 3-part test for the TRIPS agreement. It specifies what is an inventive medicine under TRIPS. Similarly, with respect to compulsory licensing, we believe that India used compulsory licensing under public health grounds to ensure an affordable price for the medicine, and in the order issued by the Indian Patent Appeals Board, it specifically mentioned that public health and affordability of the medicine was a grounds for the compulsory license.
As I mentioned at the beginning of my questioning, the U.S. has set a goal for an AIDS-free generation. Can you talk about the possibility of countries expanding the scope of patentability for certain drugs or establishing TRIPS plus patent standards and how that could affect our ability to reach our goal?
We are enormously concerned with many measures that occur right now, especially the United States, for instance, which is negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is seeking to constrain the ability of governments to both oppose patents through an oppositional process, as well as broadening the definition of scope of patentability so that the patent system ends up importing many of the frivolous patents that are often granted in the United States and the European Union. We also see a lot of bilateral pressure upon governments not to impose a strict standard of patentability to ensure that only high-value patents that actually reward true innovation are being granted. So it's not only in a bilateral relationships, it's also through free trade agreements and through other measures, which is leading to a broadening of the scope of patentability and leading to longer patent terms.
Most PEPFAR recipients currently receive first-line antiretrovirals, which are typically generic drugs and off-patent. But after taking these drugs for some time, many patients develop drug resistance, requiring second-line antiretrovirals, which cost the U.S. government 135% more because many are brand name and on patent. You mentioned in your testimony about Abbott's application for a secondary patent for an important second-line antiretroviral drug. Can you comment generally about how secondary patents on some of these brand name drugs could affect PEPFAR's ability to deliver affordable antiretrovirals to individuals who develop drug resistance to the first-line drugs?
Yes, we are facing what's known as a treatment time bomb today. All AIDS patients must switch to new second and third line medicines to continue treatment. And because these medicines are under patent, including in India and other countries, the costs are skyrocketing for our patients also. For one key third line drug produced by Merck, we have to pay $1,800 per patient, more than 10 times the cost of first line medicines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Waxman. And now recognize for 5 minutes the Vice Chair of the subcommittee, Mr. Lance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize to the panel for being in and out this morning. There are several hearings this morning of this full committee, and I want to assure every member of the panel that I think this is an incredibly important issue. Mr. Waldron, Dr. Waldron, Counselor Waldron, many titles. You've testified that 80% of the users of your drug, Sudent, receive a complete or partial subsidy. It's my understanding that one of the arguments of the Indian government in ordering a compulsory license is that drugs are needed for public health because the drugs are otherwise out of reach for Indian patients. Isn't it true, however, that Indian-made generics are priced out of range for most of the population, and so therefore how is it in the interest of public health to manufacture a drug that is cost prohibited when 80% of the Indian drug consumers are already receiving a drug from the patent holder either free or at a steep discount?
Yes. Thank you, Vice Chairman, for that question. It's one of the misperceptions that increased generic entry means more access to medicines, and that's part of the problem that's facing us in this debate. From 1972 to 2005, there were no patents protecting innovative compounds in India, yet only 20% of the population in India had access to medicines. 80% did not. Even now, that figure is better than in the period. I think it's about 30% now have access to medicines versus an earlier period where there were no patent protection. So the connection between patent protection and access to medicines is somewhat tenuous at best. We really have to look at mechanisms that do increase access to medicines. I mean, we agree with the ultimate objectives of MSF.
Of course, as do we all.
PEPFAR, and these are objectives that we all want to work towards. But I think the difference is in the mechanisms to get there. Compulsory licensing and abrogating the IP system really doesn't seem to be have a linear relationship between that and increased access to medicines, or at least that hasn't been shown anywhere in which this has been exercised.
Thank you. I'd be interested in your opinion regarding the Supreme Court's decision, the Indian Supreme Court decision in the Novartis Gleevec case. As I understand your testimony, you believe that it is inconsistent with the Indian obligations under the WTO agreement on trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, TRIPS. Could you explain the position of Pfizer regarding that issue? And I understand there may be a disagreement on the panel. I would be interested in your position.
Yeah, when you speak about drug development, I mean, you have the development of an active pharmaceutical ingredient, and then you have subsequent innovation that occurs after the identification of that active ingredient. Sometimes the active ingredient is just not bioavailable. You give it to a patient, it doesn't go, it goes right through their system. You want that incremental innovation that occurs after that to sort of make sure that you're getting optimal exposure to the patient of the drug. That's called pharmaceutical sciences. It's been practiced by pharmacists for centuries, compounding and making drugs that actually take that active ingredient and make it available to patients. That is innovation. Pharmaceutical sciences is a branch of science which pretty much literally has been written out of the Indian patent law and proscribed from patentability. And that is really something that should be part of the law to encourage the kind of innovation that you want and makes those drugs better available to patients.
From my perspective, you have hit right on the key, and I appreciate your testimony in that regard. India has been praised for improving access to medicines in parts of the developing world. It's my understanding that India raises more money taxing medicines than it actually spends on medicines for its own people. Mr. Waldron, or perhaps others on the panel, I start with Mr. Waldron, can you describe some of the access programs that your industry has implemented to help Indian patients regarding innovative medicines?
I think one of my fellow panelists described the Novartis access program. I've described our access program, but most all of the industry has implemented an access program in one form or another to make these drugs available to patients. The problem in India is that there is no counterfacing public health system in which to interact with. There is no government payer, so a lot of this has to be done at the private level or at direct interactions with clinics. So it's a very different dynamic than what we see in the United States, where we have a government payer versus another situation. So most of the industry has tried to do its best in these circumstances, but when you're not dealing with a system that treats all of the patients, the access to medicines issue becomes an access to healthcare issue, which is a completely different.
Thank you. My time has expired. Thank you very much for your
Gentleman's
testimony.
time has expired. Chair recognizes gentleman from Utah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the panel participating today. Mr. Waldron, from listening to today's testimony, it appears India is using its intellectual property law to build up their domestic industries at the expense of U.S. innovators. Can you elaborate on how these types of policies threaten to harm your specific industry if left unchallenged?
What's happening in India is being looked at very carefully by other countries. It's like portions and pieces of what has been implemented in the Indian patent law has been adopted by Argentina, the Philippines. It's being looked at in Turkey. In fact, in some of the more developed countries, they're actually looking at more actively at anti-IP type measures. This is very distressing for the point that it is the boon that has given the benefits to our economies. So we have to be very careful about counteracting anti-IP sort of contagion and spillover from India. And I think unless we are willing to look at the crucible of the activity that's happening in India and sort of draw a line and say this is unacceptable at some point, it's going to be seen as permissible by the Brazils and the South Africas and other countries to sort of take it upon themselves to implement measures, particularly if there's no downside to doing it. The biggest downside is the long-term downside, that it affects the innovative economy. It would be very short-sighted if we really to not sort of take a stand at this point and protect the innovative environment which is protected by intellectual property.
And this may not, you may not be able to answer this question, but to the extent that you see potential spillover into other countries to adopt these same policies, do you have a sense of how soon that could be presenting itself to us, where we're having a hearing again, that Chairman Terry's going to have to call a hearing and talk about, instead of India, it'll be another country? How, where is this happening so quickly?
I think we're seeing it in real time. As I mentioned, this Argentina has adopted patentability restrictions or guidelines that affect it. The Philippines have as well. The Brazilians are looking very carefully at different mechanisms. So we're seeing sort of a very concerted international effort on this, and I think it's really time that we sort of make a stand on the value of IP, and that's what we should do as a country, because we are innovators, we export innovation, and that's really so critical to our economy.
I appreciate that. Mr. Hoffman, in your testimony, you suggest that resolving issues like India's preferential market access initiative through the World Trade Organization would not be ideal for industry entrepreneurs. Is that a fair characterization, first of all?
It's certainly not ideal, largely because.
And can you just expand on why you don't think that's the right way to go, in your opinion?
Well, it's more of a, when all else fails, kind of a recommendation, and the simple reason why is that it takes years to resolve. Yeah. And in our industry, 2 or 3 years are 3 iPhones and 20 versions of Angry Birds. I mean, innovation just keeps moving along. And so we hope, again, this is one of those situations where when you have a mutually advantageous situation where both countries are innovating like they're doing. Listening to Mr. Waldron, Dr. Waldron, Councilor Waldron, I have to, hearing what he's saying in terms of when you're an innovation economy, you want to export innovation. India has progressively moved up the value chain when it comes to information technology. Right. And they are exporting more and more. Why would you risk that? By not only locking yourselves out, but the contagion effect that Mr. Waldron just talked about certainly applies in our case as well. So we hope that, given, again, the mutual understanding that we both have about the benefits of innovation and entrepreneurialism, we can resolve this short of handing this over to the trade lawyers in Geneva.
Okay. With that, Mr. Chairman, I just suggest that this potential of this spreading to other countries just highlights the importance of this hearing even more, and with that, I'll yield back to you.
Good point. Chair now recognizes Mr. Guthrie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that, and appreciate everybody being here. Ms. Dempsey, reading through your testimony, we've all talked about the range of problems with India. You referenced in your testimony the bilateral investment treaty and negotiations that they're on hold now because of India's recent actions. What would you like to see happen between now and getting these that could get these negotiations started again? What would you like to see?
Sure thing. We at the NAM have been strong supporters of bilateral investment treaties as ways to grow reciprocally investment that comes into the United States that benefits manufacturing and other economic activity here, and also broadens our relationship with those other countries. If India were prepared to agree to negotiate the type of high-level bit production provisions that were recently reviewed by this administration and put out in April of 2012 that include market access provisions, basic provisions from our own Constitution, things like takings and due process and non-discrimination, including provisions, I think, that would get at many of the property rights and forced localization issues that we're seeing, as well as high-level enforcement mechanisms. Then we would see that the Indian government is serious about moving forward and growing the U.S.-Indian relationship. As I understand it at the moment, we started these negotiations back in 2008. The U.S. took some time to review its model under this administration. And now the Indians have said, well, we're reviewing our model, a model that was already relatively weak compared to the United States system. If India's not ready to negotiate this type of high-level treaty, there are a lot of other countries in the world, in Africa and parts of Asia, that would be very interested in negotiating this. We have these types of treaty arrangements or through our trade agreements with about 60 other countries, and they really are a win-win for both sides.
Well, thanks. I guess Mr. Hoffman said in your testimony, I believe, that quote, that are certain India's policies that are certain to reverse its past successes as an emerging economic power. And is that what you're leading to? I mean, is it just foreign direct investment you think they'll lose, or what's the nature of that? Or add to that quote, I guess.
Well, we're already seeing it. We're already seeing a significant decline in foreign direct investment. I think there's a genuine concern about the direction where the country is going. But meanwhile, you can't just view India in a vacuum. You have to understand that a lot of other countries in the region are following the same playbook that India used in the 1990s, and they're developing an educated workforce. They're actually encouraging companies that have invested in India to expand in those countries, and they're essentially trying to adopt the global innovation supply chain that India developed. You take a restrictionist approach, you are essentially turning your back on the very things that you helped to create and literally handing it to your competitors in the region.
And this kind of open to the panel. Is India replace China as the country presenting most challenging environment to intellectual property? India's replaced China, or they're both they're both very serious? I think it came from your testimony, Mr. I think so.
I'll take a stab at that. Look, due to the size and scope of China's market, IP theft will continue to be a huge problem. We'll continue to need to work with China and the Chinese government for some time. That said, there are a number of examples where the Chinese government appears to have been responsive to issues raised with them, and in some areas they're certainly moving in the right direction. 2 points to be made about India, I think, are that firstly, there has been a steep decline with respect to the IP environment there over the last 18 months, so they are clearly heading in the wrong direction. The second point I'd make is that, and referencing back to the international index that was released last year, the baseline is already low. They are already the lowest in the world when it comes to their IP environment. So the bar is low, and they're already heading further down, and that's the concern with respect to India.
Well, you know, our founding fathers put in the Constitution a robust patent. That's an enumerated power of Congress, and I think what we've done in the last 226 years since the Constitution has been adopted has been phenomenal. I think it's because we've had protected of intellectual property. Now that we're global and you can invent it here and create it here, it happens and you lose it overseas, that's a problem with an investment. And granted, there are issues with cost and trying to make sure that we get products to people that need them at the right price at the right time, which we need to focus on. But thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes Mr. Olson of Texas.
I thank the chair and welcome to our witnesses. The topic of this hearing is very important to me. My district, Texas 22, is the most ethnically diverse district in America. And the Indo-American part of that diversity is the fastest growing part. If the Indo-American community in Texas 22 grows like it did between the census of 2000 and 2010, in the 2020 census, they will be the majority minority in Texas 22. They'll be larger than the African American population, larger than the Hispanic American population, larger than the Anglo American population. They will be the largest. And Texas 22 is the only one in 435 congressional districts that has that blessing. But robust trade with India that complies with international standards is more important than ethnic diversity in my district in Texas. It's important for our national security. Looking at a map of the world, like I did last night, the U.S. is facing threats to our security from both sides of the ocean, Pacific side, the Atlantic side. If you could magically take a flight out of Reagan National and head due east, after you cross the Atlantic, you'd hit Morocco, then Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, China, Thailand, and Myanmar. And now you have the Pacific heading home. There are not a whole lot of friends on that route. In fact, most of those countries are dominated by radical Muslim governments that want to hurt America. There are two democracies on that flight path: Israel on the eastern Mediterranean Sea, and India in the heart of Asia with a dominant position on the Indian Ocean. And I've seen firsthand that dominant position because I deployed for 6 months to an island called Diego Garcia in 1994 in the dead center of the Indian Ocean. And while India is the world's largest democracy, she's still young, 66 years old, and going through some serious growing pains associated with individual freedoms in free market economies. And when our country was 66, we were having some big problems that manifested themselves in a civil war 20 years later. Our trade relationship with India has grown dramatically in the last 2 decades. American businesses need that huge market, and India needs us. And like all of y'all, my blood boils when I hear that India is revoking and denying patents and granting compulsory license for cancer treatments, or adopting local content requirements, or the recent Chamber of Commerce Day that ranked India's IP environment behind China and Russia. China can't spell IP if you spot them in the eye. As a nation, we should handle India like my dad did when I was growing up. I made his blood boil. He put his arm around me and showed me or pulled me where he needed to go to make sure with his fingers resting firmly on my shoulder just to inflict some pain if I diverted from the course we need to go down. That's what we should do with India. I've got a really high-level question here, and sorry for the time, but most of the discussions about trade policy with India occur in the executive branch. Talked about the Secretary of State going there, the Vice President, the Secretary of Energy went there recently. Is there a role for Congress? And there's, most importantly, what can I do with my district to help get some grassroots? Because we have people in my district who have great strength, great pull in India. What can I do to help make sure we get India on the right path again? All the way across the board, start with you, Ms. Dempsey.
Thank you. I think you see the issue very clearly. We must have a strategic relationship with India, but we've got to do it as equals, and they've got to play by the rules. I think there is a definite role for Congress. You know, over 250 members of the House and Senate have written to our President or Secretary Kerry in the last few weeks, identifying these concerns, all talking about the need to get our relationship on the right track. You know, there are ways to grow manufacturing in India. We at the NAM have a lot of ideas about growing manufacturing. That's what we focus on here in the United States. India can take a page. I think sharing those desires, but also talking to the Indian government officials, the embassy, others that come through, and talking about this is what makes an economy strong, and this is how our two economies can best work together.
Thank you. And the gentleman's time is. All right. When we're finished here, there will be a statement about written questions to you, and I think we know one of the first questions that will be submitted to the rest of the panel now. At this time, the gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank each of you for being here. This is certainly a very important issue. I know that we've talked about a number of different industries and areas that are of great concern with us. And of course, for my state In my district, we have things ranging from steel manufacturing to poultry producers. And I know that India has denied access for decades to their markets to U.S. poultry producers. I know WTO is looking at that now. We're hopeful that that this will be resolved, and there's no reason that we can't have a robust trading partner on a fair and level playing field with India if they so desire, and we hope that they will. But if I could ask you, Ms. Dempsey and Mr. Elliott, as we look at particularly at subsidies, I know that the Indian government heavily subsidizes a number of its domestic industries, including its steel industry. The government provides benefits to its domestic steel producers through a number of programs, including a variety of export incentives and controls over raw material prices. For example, the Reserve Bank of India provides preferential short-term pre-shipment export financing or packing credits to exporters through commercial banks. How can the United States government address the market distorting effects of these subsidies and ensure that they do not have detrimental effects on U.S. manufacturers in the U.S. and global marketplaces?
Thank you, Congressman. You've identified a number of serious issues in addition to the direct subsidies that you're talking about. There are also export tax restrictions on iron ore and derivatives that make the price of certain raw materials unfairly low in India's market. They have, I think it's the 5th largest steel producing country in the world right now. How does the U.S. government engage? I mean, on one hand, U.S. businesses have already employed our trade remedy rules, the anti-dumping and countervailing duty, which does get at the subsidies. We'd like to see Congress better ensure enforcement of those rules, and there's the Enforce Act that we're hoping to get included in the Customs Reauthorization Bill in another committee. But that would be one way. You know, the U.S. government is in a lot of dialogue at the OECD and in other areas on steel trade more generally, trying to eliminate subsidies. You know, over the years, we've seen massive overproduction. It really has caused a change in our industry here. And so I think those are the types of initiatives and the dialogue that we all want to see to help India understand there are ways to grow your economy. It's very much in the United States' benefit for India to grow its economy, but there are ways to do that work, and that there are ways that are destructive to our relationship. And we think that there are good ways that, you know, the Commerce Department, the Office of USTR, as well as other agencies can help with the Indian government if they want to listen.
Thank you, Ms. Dempsey. Mr. Elliott, anything you can add to that on your opinion of how we can best address what India is doing, particularly as it applies to the steel subsidies?
Thank you, Congressman. I'm afraid that trade subsidies is not my strength or area of expertise, but I'm more than happy to get an answer back to you with respect to the U.S. Chamber's position on this. But I couldn't imagine it is a terribly different position to that of the NAM. Okay. But I'll certainly provide.
Thank you very much. And I know we're on limited time, but I want to say also, talking about the WTO. I know that India is currently pursuing a dispute settlement case against the United States at WTO, challenging the U.S. application of countervailing duties to imports of Indian hot-rolled steel. India's challenge is in part due to the U.S. Department of Commerce's findings that subsidized iron ore was supplied to Indian steel producers by a state-owned company. This case dates all the way back to the year 2000, I believe, and challenges not just the specific CVD cases on hot-rolled steel, but also the U.S. trade laws and regulations on which the case was based. Are we doing everything possible to protect our trade remedy system, which operates according to WTO principles, from such unwarranted attacks? And what additional steps can the United States government take to strengthen our trade remedy laws? I know we have almost out of time, but Ms. Dempsey, take a stab at that.
Thank you. On the issue of the case, I think that the Office of USTR, the Department of Commerce that helps USTR with these cases, is very strong and clearly defends U.S. trade remedy laws in this case. And I do think that they are doing all that they can in that context. We could improve, as I said, the enforcement of our trade remedy laws. We have too many cases where companies bring cases and then they win them. They spend a lot of money, many of them small, medium-sized companies, and then there's transshipment around that, and there's no way, it takes the Customs Department years to even determine whether there's a problem.
Thank you. My time has expired, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the panel members being here. This is indeed an important hearing for my district. Manufacturing is a big issue in eastern and southeastern Ohio, particularly the steel industry. Lots of concerns about some of the things that we've talked about today. According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, state-owned enterprises, or SOEs, in India account for 20% of the value of the stock market and are pervasive in mining and energy, steel, logistics, and other sectors critical to the manufacturing of raw materials. For example, the Indian government owns at least 80% of the Steel Authority of India, a company called SAIL, the country's largest steel producer. What steps can we take to ensure that Indian state-owned enterprises act in accordance with commercial principles and compete fairly with privately owned companies worldwide?
That one's coming back to me. You raise a very important point, and you know, in negotiations the United States has right now with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the issue of ensuring that state-owned enterprises act in commercial considerations is a very important offensive request of industry and the U.S. government. India is far from participating in that type of high-level discussion or negotiation. What I think, there's a few areas where I think we can do more. Some of it comes back to, I think, all the basic issues and the industrial policies that my business colleagues and I have identified here. Helping the Indian government understand that a market-driven economy, an economy that is based on respect for private property, including intellectual property, and where fair competition isn't a bad thing, but is a good thing. Those type of competition principles, that type of market opening is going to help India move towards a better result. I know there are discussions in the OECD, of which India is not a part, on these issues of state-owned enterprises. I don't think we've got a solution yet for how to deal with the SOE issue in these emerging markets, but we're happy to work with you on that.
I certainly hope we continue to work on it because it's problematic. Also, India imposes export restraints on a number of essential manufacturing raw materials, including a 20% duty on steel scrap exports and a 30% duty on iron ore exports. Such export restraints artificially decrease prices for Indian manufacturers while limiting supply and increasing prices for U.S. manufacturers. What measures should we take to encourage India to remove these market-distorting trade barriers?
This is a tough issue. You know, the U.S. Constitution, our forefathers long understood this issue more clearly. We ban, for instance, in the United States, we can't impose export taxes constitutionally. It doesn't make sense. Unfortunately, the World Trade Organization rules, while they prohibit quantitative restraints on exports, they don't yet prohibit the taxation of exports like we're seeing in India, which has exactly the type of anti-competitive effects that you've cited. We'd like to be able to get back to the World Trade Organization. We'd like to have global talks about this. In the meantime, I think we need to help the Indian government, help their industry understand that this is a short-term problem that is going to have long-term effects on the global competitiveness of its industry.
Okay. All right. One final question while I've still got a minute left. India also imposes barriers to imports into its domestic markets. For example, in September 2012, India's Ministry of Steel began requiring the application of mandatory standard certifications for a number of steel products. Because of these new requirements, all exporters of steel products to India must register with the Indian Bureau and pay a 1% tariff for inspections. What steps should we be prepared to take to ensure that those barriers, the import barriers, do not negatively impact U.S. exporters to India. Is that in the same category with all the rest of these?
That is exactly in the same category. We've heard those concerns in our membership, but we've also heard concerns of customs in India in a whole host of other industries. This has to be part of the solution, because part of what India is doing is making it harder for us to get our imports in through a variety of different areas.
Well, having worked in the private sector before coming here to represent the people that I do, the company that I worked for had relationships with India and certainly viewed India as an emerging market. Hopefully, through our negotiations with India, we can help them understand that if they want American companies to consider India an emerging market, they better start playing fairly in the game. Thank you all for your yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and that concludes the questions. I remind members that they have 10 days in which to submit written questions to our panel. And to our panel, if you do receive written questions, we would really like, a timely response. And that would be a couple weeks, not several months or years. And I want to thank all of you. Your testimony was great. The answers to question and gave us lots of things to think about in regard to the issue with trade patents with India. So thank you for your time. This concludes our hearing, and we are adjourned. Okay.
Do you keep these documents? Does somebody